Thank you so much, Mr. Benavides, for allowing me to come to your home to meet your wonderful boys and do the puns. I'm just curious, who referred you to our agency for the puns registration?
Yeah, so it was originally through some parents at school,
Okay.
Where our boys go, attend school. They told me about some of the services and briefly talked about puns. They didn't really give me some general information, but I would like to talk a little bit more about the puns program.
Sure.
And maybe discuss it how it would benefit my twin boys.
Absolutely. The PUNS stands for Prioritization of Urgency of Need for Services, PUNS. It is a database that was created by the Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Developmental Disabilities back in 2003. Then the implementation phase began in 2004. So what DHS-DD wanted to do at the time was to find out the service needs of our families. So they contracted with every single service coordination agency or case management agency. There's 17 of us statewide. We, Community Alternatives Unlimited, serves your catchment area, which is Lake County, suburban Cook County, and Chicago North. So part of what we do is the PUNS enrollment piece, which is trying to meet with families face-to-face and documenting the person's needs, unmet needs, met needs, whatever, existing supports that you and your wife, Rita, think the boys would need, whether the states provide the funding or not. Once you document all those services, then the last part of the interview process is assessing whether or not we leave the kids in the PUNS database, or do you think they need something more aggressively like a case manager to help you apply for crisis funding. Based on the time that I was able to observe the kids, I think they may need more than just being on a database, because, as you may or may not know, there's a lot of people waiting for services throughout the state of Illinois. As of June 6th of this year, 2016, there are over 19,000 people in your situation waiting for services. So basically, if you're talking about a couple of young boys with significant medical issues and being physically, challenged and being total care, you may want to think about, something other than just the waiting list for services. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we fill out the PUNS, which is the very first step in applying for services. And I'm glad that you were proactive enough to meet with me today in your home and figure out how do we plan for the future of our 6-year-old twins. The very first step that we will do is, and thank you so much for sending me the information yesterday, because I got the IEPs from the kids. I got Fernando on my left, say hello, and then I got Alejandro on my farther left, and both boys, Alejandro and Fernando, are indeed receiving special education services in your county due to a developmental disability. So they are going to be eligible for PUNS. Now, that is the first step. What we're going to be doing right now is, first of all, documenting existing supports, which is for both boys. Typically, when we're talking about a 6-year-old, existing supports are what kinds of services they're receiving at the moment. And I believe they're getting special education services through your local school, right?
Yeah, yes, they are. And I want to thank you. I know we've been working and coordinating this, but the ability for you to come here and do this has helped me and my wife and our other children in balance, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to get to this step. I wouldn't even be able to start with this, because the flexibility you've demonstrated is really what's helping me to care for my boys and the other children. And with our work-life balance, that flexibility has really helped us significantly.
Yeah. And
on a personal level.
Yeah, we understand that and we appreciate it, because I think the minute you express interest in having your boys in the PUNS database, but then realizing that it would be very difficult for you, I was glad that we were able to come out here. So we're going to be doing this. Again, it is the first step. We're going to be talking about a lot of stuff. In addition to special education school, do the boys receive any other type of therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech, that you may want to talk about?
Yeah, so we're fortunate that we do get the wide gamut of therapies that addresses their needs, and that is only through the school system where they attend classes. So the boys need occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, vision therapy.
Oh, vision therapy.
So these are all inclusive in the program that we're getting. So there is a significant need.
So OT, PT, speech, and vision.
Yes.
Okay. And they both go to the same school?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And I have all the information about the school in the intake form, because I believe when you call for the appointment, we did complete an intake form with all the demographic information and the diagnostic information. So I already filled that in. I pre-filled the application. So the next thing would be they're getting OT, PT, and speech. They go to a special education school, also get vision therapy. Do they get any type of in-home support after they come home from school?
Well, we did in the past tense. We were in a respite program a few years ago, and the state of Illinois has had some financial issues and budgetary constraints with our elected officials. So they've made some decisions, and hard decisions, that have impacted the respite services that we were receiving through one of the agencies. Unfortunately, that stopped, and that increased our burden on us. So it's been difficult to juggle that and be maintained to be gainfully employed while we're addressing their needs. That's been a challenge for us.
Okay.
So we did at one point, we do not currently.
So basically it's just you and your wife taking care of Alejandro and Fernando when you're here, or what happens when you both at work?
Let me preface that. It's my wife and myself taking care of Alejandro and Fernando and our 3 other children. I have 5 children under the age of 12, so they are all equal. So I have a 12-year-old daughter, I have a 10-year-old son, I have a 7-year-old boy. Now my 3 older children do not have special needs, and but my identical twin boys, they do have special needs, and they take up a lot of our time. So I care for the twins, but I also have to care for my 3 other children. And that is a difficult task when you are balancing it and working and ensuring that the other kids are also addressed, and so that becomes difficult. So that's been challenging last year and a half, 2 years here.
How do the boys get to and from school?
They're transported via bus.
Okay, school bus.
So there is a school bus that picks them up. They have their bus driver and an aide on their bus that's dedicated for them. That was determined based on the staff, and so the school district provides that to get the boys to and from.
We talked a little bit over the phone about the significant health issues of Alejandro and Fernando. Have you been referred to an outside agency for help in addition to respite? I'm thinking, you know, with both of your children being confined to a wheelchair and their physical needs and their medical needs, that perhaps DSCC would have been a resource for them.
So the DSCC program, a few months ago, the boys, at the termination of our physicians and the medical professionals, the boys had to have surgery for G-tubes for feeding purposes. While we were at the hospital, we met with the DSCC representatives to evaluate the boys for medically fragile and technology dependent. But the boys were right under their threshold for per child. And in meeting with the professional, with the social worker professional representative from DSCC, they were just right under their cutoff. And when I inquired about multiple children in one household, identical, and in my case, identical twins, identical patients with identical diagnosis, despite having 2 boys with the same condition, and both were right under the cutoff, that did not play a factor. So that was independently gauged. So we did not qualify for DSCC because of that.
Is there anything else that they do? I mean, are they able to participate like in special recreation activities, summer camp?
The boys are 100% dependent on us. The boys' genetic disorder, it's a mitochondrial complex 4, and that is a genetic disorder. The boys do not sit, stand, walk, crawl, talk, or feed themselves. They are 100% dependent on us from the moment that they wake up to the moment that they go to sleep, and even in the middle of the night when they have seizures. Okay. We have to constantly monitor them. So we are their sole source of life, their lifelines for the boys. They cannot communicate with us verbally. They don't tell us when they're hungry, when they're hurt. So it's really incumbent upon us to juggle everything and ensure that they're cared for.
Okay. Moving on to the next area, which is supports needed. That means we can document as many supports as you and your wife, Rita, think that the boys will benefit from regardless of state funding. Right now they're getting OT, PT, speech, and vision therapy at school. Do you think, I'm thinking that personal support will be something that will be appropriate in this case because they rely entirely on you and your wife for the personal support and the physical assistance and the feeding and all that. So perhaps personal support will be something that will be available, whether it is via the database or PUNS selection, which is a lottery, or us, which is probably the way to go, sending a caseworker, a service coordinator to help you apply for funding via crisis, and which is something that I will explain in a little bit. But I think, I think the boys don't have any behavioral challenges, right? They're pretty good.
Well, the boys, yeah. So their personality, it is, as you can see here.
This is a sleepyhead right here.
Yeah, my little guys. So that's part of their underlying medical condition. They're always low energy and low tone. Okay. Additional services, as I mentioned, we don't have anything else, but we have to, from the moment, making all their food, everything has to be pureed. Okay. And feeding them takes the time. It's a challenge. It takes about 45 minutes per child per meal. That's a time-consuming portion. Their hygiene, we give the boys a bath every day. Okay. With their G-tubes, that has to be cleaned, and so diapers changing. So it's an ongoing, and it's time-consuming when you have two children. Yeah. And right now they're little, my little guys, so they're about 40 pounds approximately. But they get older, they're getting older, it's getting heavier.
They grow and they get bigger.
So
and they get
it's
stronger.
getting a challenge, and that's one of the things I wanted to discuss a little bit more. So you talk about the PUNS and what it can do, but as a parent, some of the questions that I had are the different types of services. But before we get to that point, I'd like to talk a little bit more about you mentioned the crisis or other types. Based on our situation, and now that we're talking, you've seen my boys, and you know what my story is, the challenges that my wife and I have with our other kids and with our twins. What other services are there?
Typically, when I'm doing a PUNS interview with a family, I not only do the documentation piece, but I also assess the situation for crisis need. And every time I see a family with more than one child with special needs, the more significant the disability, the more of a need to apply for crisis funding rather than waiting in the PUNS database for many, many years. I think that's something that many families can't wait when they are in your situation. Right now, the boys do have a day program, which is school, but then what happens when they come home for spring break and they're here for the whole week? What happens in the summertime when they only go to school, if they go to school for an extended school year, half a day? What happens when there are holidays? I think you and your wife could be the best ones to tell me, as a service coordinator, what the emergent crisis is, because the reality is, somebody in your situation, probably cannot wait for a PUNS selection, especially when the people getting selected for PUNS are strictly adults, and your boy's at 6 years old. Situations like this, what we do typically as a director of a case management program at CAU, Community Alternatives Unlimited, what we do is we assess the case, determine that the case needs to be open right away. We would assign a case coordinator to work with you, do the assessments that are necessary that we will pay for, determine eligibility for the boys, which they're going to be eligible as two children with developmental disabilities, then help you apply for crisis funding, which, as it's states by Department of Human Services, Division of Developmental Disabilities, they define crisis as imminent risk of abuse, neglect, or homelessness. Now, I'm not saying, again, every time I say that, people just frown upon because, oh my gosh, Juan, how I don't meet that criteria because I'm not abusive, I'm not neglectful, I'm not homeless, and unfortunately we have to check a box. And unless you, dad, or you, mom, if she were here, unless you can guarantee me that you can stay up 24/7, 365, at some point, the body breaks down from doing so much lifting. And I believe you've been doing this for a long, long time. Lifting from what happens when you're sick. Let's say that what happens when you and your wife are working and the respite that you used to rely upon before is not available anymore. That will be the type of service that will come to the house and give you a respite. It will give you a break so that you can spend equal time with the other children. At the same time, you have somebody that you trust working with Alejandro and Fernando with self-care skills, with the lifting, with the bathing, with the toileting. And then the more medically involved things like the medication administration and all that stuff, you guys could take care of. But typically when people can get access to these services via two ways. The lottery way, which is the PONS selection system or process, where you don't have to justify crisis need. We just show confirmation of a developmental disability, and the person gets selected, their name gets selected, and they get services. The problem in the situation when you have more than one child with special needs is, what if one child gets picked and the other one doesn't? At this point, it sounds to me, you will be looking for services for both kids at the same time. So you feel that they're both equally supported. So my recommendation would be to pursue the funding via crisis because of their health. Now, part of the PONS form is going to be asking me too about your health and your wife's health. I mean, are you healthy? I mean, you guys are the sole breadwinners for this family, so you have to identify if leaving their names in the PONS database and updating the PONS every year. I believe you called a year ago to have it in the PONS, but I think my recommendation when you have two kids with special needs like this would be to go the crisis route. Now, when we are trying to make a case for crisis funding, we take into consideration many things. The age of the caregiver, the health of the caregiver. Why is that important? Because the state of Illinois will look at you, mom and dad, as the primary caregivers for Fernando and Alejandro. But then what happens if mom and dad are breaking down because what if you have a bad day? What if you're not feeling well one day? Then it will leave one caregiver taking care of 5 children. So I mean, unless you have a plan B of somebody coming from the outside, it's worth exploring. The worst possible thing that could happen is we assign a case coordinator, that person helps you apply for funding. We're not able to justify crisis need at the time, but we can appeal. So you have nothing to lose and a lot to gain.
You know, Mr. Aponte, I never thought about what you're mentioning. I've been fortunate. I'm physically fit, but I was injured in the Marine Corps, so I'm a disabled veteran actually, and I've seen firsthand what when one caregiver is not there for the family, and that does keep me up at night.
Yeah.
That does keep me up at night.
I think.
What would happen if I get sick?
Right.
Right? Who's going to care for my children?
Right. I think what I always, when we have these conversations with families, I mean, we try to look at the whole scenario and try to envision what would happen if certain supports were not in place. As you're well aware, the respite funding was either discontinued, is supposed to come back, but is respite going to be enough? Is 10 hours or 12 hours that were whatever you were approved for before? Is 12 hours a month per child better than 15 hours a week that you will get with the children's home-based program? And again, even if you were linked with that type of service via crisis, whether you're working collectively with us and we are able to justify need, at some point you and your wife would probably have to have a conversation to say, is this going to be sufficient? But it will be better than what you're having now, because right now you don't have any services. So I think as a professional, I think it is my duty to at least encourage you to explore that option, because it will be beneficial for the boys. It will be nice because you get a break, you get a breather. You get to do things with your wife, you get to do things with the other 3 children, so that they feel that you're spending equal time with them. But ultimately, it's about the parents being ready to pursue whatever option, and which way am I going to do it? Am I going to do it to be honest with you, if you want to leave your kids in the ponds, that is your decision. But right now, children are not getting selected in the ponds.
When you said it was a lottery, what's the number of that lottery? How does that work?
When it first started, since 2004, over 48,000 people statewide have registered their needs in the ponds database. As of June of 2016, that number has dwindled to 19,000 plus. So the number is going down, but it's because of a class action lawsuit or a consent decree called LIGAS, L-I-G-A-S, and you're more than welcome to Google it. But that type of litigation, and it's prompting the state to pull more people from the waiting list, but because the LIGAS consent decree only pertains to adults, your boys are going to be in the database for a long, long time. They're 6 years old. So I think my recommendation, when I again, part of my job as doing so many outreach and so many ponds interviews is also assessing need. Do we live in the ponds or do we open a case? You have nothing to lose. The service is free. And we're just basically gonna help you apply, and we're gonna help you push to make sure that both boys get the service that they need. Worst case scenario, as I said before, they get rejected, we appeal. But in my experience, when you're talking about kids with multiple disabilities who are total care, and you have two parents that have to work, because I'm envisioning that at some point your job or your work gets compromised because you have to say, "Oh, my kid is sick that day. I gotta leave work and I gotta come home." Same with your wife. So I think those are the things that you as a couple have to talk about and say, do we wait for ponds? What if the number never gets called, or what if just one and not the other? Or rather than concentrating our efforts to do the advocacy necessary, getting the justification needed so that both of them get the service in the home for as long as you can handle them in the home.
Yeah, I don't think, given the statistics that you're telling me here with lottery, I don't think that's an option.
Yeah.
We can't wait to exercise.
So I'm thinking here, to continue with the supports needed, that the boys will continue receiving the vision therapy, the physical therapy, speech, I'm sure adaptive equipment, and also under the other individual supports would be the CHBS, the Children's Home-Based Support Services Program. So when you see that acronym, is the Children's Waiver Program. Essentially, it's based on the maximum amount of SSI that anybody gets in your children's situation because they're still in school. It will be that amount of money, which I believe is around $733 a month, multiplied by 2, because they're still in special education. That amount is spent in services. Your situation, where do you see that funding being used most? Manpower in the home to help you with their day-to-day self-care of your kids. The lifting, the dressing, the feeding, toileting, you name it, repositioning. So I mean, I think it's not the answer, but I think it's a good. It's a step in the right direction. The good thing about once somebody gets that funding is it stays with them. So when they become 18 years of age, then that funding gets transferred to the adult version of the Children's Waiver Program, which will be called Adult Home-Based Support Services Program, AHBS.
So in the case of the boys, I think you mentioned all the points. So as I mentioned earlier, we're talking, my little boys really need a lot of help. And the feeding is time consuming. I mean, we make all their meals, but just to feed them alone. Just to feed each child takes 40 to 45 minutes per feeding, 3 times a day, and then times 2 children. That is a time consuming effort. Bathing the kids, toileting the kids. So this manpower component is significant.
Another option that a lot of our families who have children or adults with physical disabilities and cognitive disabilities, but mainly physical disabilities, pursue is the other waiver program called the DRS, Home Services Program, which is geared primarily now towards people who are total care with significant health and physical needs. Because in your experience with DSCC, they were not considered to be technologically dependent enough because they never had the G-tube implanted, The wheelchair is not considered to be technologically dependent. A trach tube, G tube would. With DRS home services, you have to, of course, justify need, but you don't have to justify crisis need like the children's waiver program. So what some families do when we're working with them is, okay, I'm in the Ponce, but I don't want to wait in the Ponce only. I want to open a case. I want to have a service coordinator working with me. What kinds of, part of our job is to give you resources at the same time. That's why we talked about respite and getting reconnected with respite, perhaps getting reconnected with the SEC. Clearly, you have done an unbelievable job, making your home very accessible, which is fantastic. But also exploring other ways to get in-home support here, which would be DRS. Home services, getting either a personal care attendant to work with the kids in the home, or they also have a respite component to their service. And I'll be glad to exchange the phone number with you. I'd like to later on, and I have your email address and all that I can give you. And also, I could actually make an online referral for you because it is a lifeline. What respite was when it was in existence, it was a lifeline to families, and it was taken away. It may be reinstated. I don't know how long. But then DRS continues to be available to families. But in my opinion, based on what I've seen from your boys, they would meet criteria based on their physical disability and the fact that they require total care from an adult for everything. So I think that's something that is worth exploring until you find the ideal Medicaid waiver program, whether it is the DRS home services program or the children's home-based services program that could give you the most hours for your boys. The DRS home services program, all the services will be coming to the home. So that means that the DRS stands for Department of Rehabilitation Services, and their home services division, when they will come to your house, like I did today, they will do an assessment, and based on points, they will determine whether your boys, Fernando and Alejandro, would meet criteria for services. And then based on that, they will give you X number of hours per week, and they will contract those hours with a home health care agency that will send a worker to your house. But that's part of, again, everything starts with Ponce. You come to us, we do the Ponce, and then we start exchanging resources. And then as we are exchanging resources, then my job becomes assessing need. Is it worth it for this family to stay in Ponce, or should we open a case? And to be honest with you, I think that's what we would do. Open a case and help apply for crisis funding, unless you have an objection to that.
Absolutely not. This is exactly what we need.
And we work with many other students from the same school that have similar needs, and we have been able to get funding in the past. Now, the funding is not a guarantee. We have to fight for it pretty much. But Ponce, another importance about Ponce is it becomes part of Alejandro and Fernando's referral packet when it's time to apply for crisis funding. The Ponce is attached to it. So right now, I believe your boys were on the critical need category of the Ponce. Yeah, as I think we talked about it over the phone, the Ponce has 3 categories, meaning planning for need will be Alejandro and Fernando needing services more than 2 years away, less than 5 because they're still in special education. Critical need, I think you were leaning towards that, meaning they need services within a year.
Within a year, yes.
Based on what I've seen, I'm thinking we talk about emergency because if they only rely, you have no respite, you have no outside agency coming to the house to support you and your family, you have 3 other kids that you have to support. I think the crisis will be the ideal way for in-home supports. So that's what I'm going to mark with your permission in the Ponce application: crisis need for emergency need for in-home services.
So tell me a little bit more how that would work then. Once we go through that, and you mentioned it's not
once
guaranteed.
We're done here, I would assign your case. Fernando and Alejandro will be assigned to one of our service coordinators. That person will meet with you, come do a home visit like this, refer you to a psychologist to do a licensed clinical psychologist to do psychological evaluation. Forms would need to be filled out, medical forms, physical examination forms. Once we do what is called the pre-admission screening assessment, that assessment determines their eligibility to receive services as 2 individuals with developmental disabilities. It's a formality because by looking at the IEP, we know that they're going to be eligible. eligibility doesn't translate into funding. But see, that's something that we would have never talked about unless you allow me to come here to talk about ponds. Some people come to our agency just to sign up for the ponds and that's it, and they can wait. Some families we come and meet, and typically when I have to go to somebody's house like today, I know that the need is more urgent because you couldn't make it to us, I had to come to you. So in the back of my mind, I was thinking at least critical need or emergency. And when I met your boys, I figure you need more than just, unless you can wait a year. If the answer is no, I think crisis application is the way to go. I'm going to check in-home support for emergency need for in-home supports.
Thank you.
And again, I typically don't like to bombard families with too much information when we're talking about the initial ponds, but when I see more than one person with special needs, it's always worth talking about what else is available so that you have, the more information that you have, the better decisions you're going to be making for the life of your children.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you have any other questions?
No, I think you've answered them, so thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming out here.
Thank you so much for having me. So It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Alejandrofernando.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you for having me come to your house.